Tonight, a look at the new federal budget, China's change in its one-child policy, and the current state of ISIS. Let's talk politics. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to Talking Points. I'm Max Darrow, your moderator. Let's take a look at today's top stories for this week. Syracuse voters took to the polls on Tuesday to pick local representatives to fill positions at city, county, court, town, and state levels. Joni Mahoney was elected Onondaga executive, and county legislators in all 17 districts kept their seats. Of the 5 Common Council districts, only the 1st district elected a Republican. And while it was once thought that Officer Joe Glinowitz died heroically in the line of duty, new evidence attributes his death to a suicide. Investigators now know that he had been laundering money for the past 7 years from a department program. Many suspect that Glinowitz staged his death to look like a homicide for fear of having his criminal activity found out. And British and U.S. officials say that ISIS may have planted a bomb that brought down a Russian jet over Egypt, killing 224 passengers. U.S. intelligence has been monitoring ISIS internal messages, and they found potential evidence of the terrorist group's involvement on a social media site. No conclusion has been reached, and tourists are being held in Egypt until officials have more information. Now, those are this week's top talking points. Starting the conversation, the 66th annual Election Day Spaghetti Dinner is held at Our Lady of Pompey. Talking Points' Caroline Strange tells us about the fundraiser.
The annual Election Day Spaghetti Dinner usually draws in around 2,000 hungry people each year. And despite not having statewide or a presidential election, this year was no exception. Some of the attendees have been coming for many years.
Oh, I think we've been coming here. She went here for pre-K, and I was a member here of the church, so we've probably been coming 40 years.
And for others, this was their first time.
A friend of mine invited me who's been coming for a long time. He said it was a great time, said there was a lot of people. And I know some people that come to Pompeii, so they told me that it would be a good time as well.
The dinner doesn't require you to stay and eat it here. You could also order it to go or have it delivered.
Many come for the food and stay for the atmosphere, and local candidates make sure to stop by.
We just had a conversation with the county executive. She came over to see the babies. Having the babies is also a big hit, so we get a lot of attention because we have the babies.
But the food is what draws in the crowd, and volunteers work ahead of time to make thousands of meatballs and tubs of sauce. Lucy Paris shared their secret ingredient.
We've pretty much kept it right to what our grandmothers had, which were those people back then. The same good sauce making and spice of love in every little bit of it.
Reporting in Syracuse, I'm Caroline Strange.
And after the break, we'll have all you need to know about the federal budget plan that will take us through the 2017 fiscal year. We'll be right back.
Looks like it's done.
Don't let salmonella get funky with your chicken. On average, 1 in 6 Americans will get a foodborne illness this year. You can't see these microbes, but they might be there. So learn the right temperature to cook each type of meat. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
This past Monday, President Obama gave his approval on a new budget deal. The budget deal lets the government avoid a default that would have happened on Tuesday. Talking Points correspondent Johnny Oliver is here to tell us more about the deal. Johnny, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Max.
So, Johnny, there are a lot of details to this deal.
Yes, sir. It raises the federal spending limit by about a little over $80 billion. And that money is going to go between the domestic as well as the defense funds for the federal government.
So this deal has to have a big effect for the future lawmakers.
Yes, it does. So right now, the lawmakers have until March 2017 before they discuss the federal budget anymore. So that gives them a little over 2 years to focus on other matters rather than having the federal budget come up year after year, and allows them to focus on other things besides the budget.
So how does this then factor into former Speaker John Boehner's legacy?
I think it definitely helps his legacy a little bit, because now, as he steps down, the government can focus on other things, as I stated before. And it accomplishes a few things that he wanted to do. It increases military spending. It offsets the spending increases with corresponding cuts for savings, as well as locking in an agreement until 2017. And it helps him, but it also does take away a little bit. And because back in 2011, he wanted to put a ceiling on the budget in the Budget Control Act, and this does undo that act.
So then, switching to the new speaker, this will have a role in Paul Ryan's speakership.
Yes, he's free to focus on other things now instead of the budget shortly after he takes the Speaker of the House position. But that doesn't mean he was 100% happy with it. He thought that the spending increase was a little too much, and I quote, "The right's going to get more military money, the left's going to get more welfare money. The secret handshake goes on, and the American public gets stuck with the bill." So he's obviously not happy with how much money the federal government is going to spend.
But he wasn't willing to speak outrightly about his lack of support for the bill? Or am I misreading you there?
I think you're misreading me a little bit. He was not happy with it, although it is now off the table for him once he gets into the Speaker of the House position.
Johnny, thank you so much. Roughly 6,000 federal inmates are now being given a second chance, years earlier than expected. Talking Points correspondent Ray Merrick explains the reasoning behind this massive prisoner release.
Thank you, Max. Thousands of convicted drug offenders have been let out of prison early this week ahead of their scheduled sentences, a move which marks the largest one-time release of inmates from federal prison in the United States. Federal judges examined specific criminal cases, then granted releases in shorter sentences for lower-level, nonviolent offenders. According to the Justice Network, 2.3 million American adults, or 1 in 100, are in prison or jail across this country, by far the highest of any nation. In comparison, this is roughly 4 times the rate of China's number of incarcerations. This mass release of prisoners has been anticipated for months. Back in July, the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which is responsible for setting guidelines of federal crimes, voted unanimously to reduce terms for drug offenders already in prison. About 1/3 of these 6,000 released prisoners are undocumented immigrants and will be sent to ICE, or the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to be potentially deported. The rest of the prisoners, who are predominantly Black and Hispanic men, will live in halfway houses or home confinements for an easy transition back to the local community. Federal probation officers are required to consistently interact with these prisoners, speak with police officers and leaders in their local communities, and to develop a supervising plan based on their findings. The greatest challenge here is long-term prison reform. According to Matthew Rowland, chief of the Probation and Pretrial Services Office of the U.S. Courts, 2 in 10 criminals under federal supervision are arrested again on felony charges within 3 years. President Obama has been working on a substantial prison reform policy, which includes adult reentry education grants, banning the box for federal employment, and expanding tech and job training for former inmates.
So, Ray, there are larger debates over prison overpopulation and drug legalization. This ties them together.
Yeah, Max. So Republicans and Democrats are actually in agreement. Republicans and Democrats are actually in agreement that prison overpopulation is a large issue in the United States. However, how exactly to implement reforms, that's up for debate. On the side of drug legalization, when we're talking about that, on the side of drug legalization, we're talking about how the Republicans are likely to reconsider their positions on the minimum prison sentence for illegal, the minimum prison sentence for the minimum prison sentence. Oh God, the minimum prison sentence for drug legalization. Yeah.
Ray, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Coming up next on Talking Points, locals are not happy about a proposed inland port in Jamesville. Stay with us.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
Pretty much a good day for me would be people leaving their hands off of me. I'm always called names. Everywhere that I go, there's always someone calling me names, calling me gay. I've been choked, thrown up against a wall, punched. Nobody's ever tried to help me.
A proposed cargo transportation center in Jamesville, or inland port as some are calling it, could be a source of economic growth and job opportunities. Talking Points correspondent Molly Smith joins us now to talk about why some neighbors aren't seeing it that way. Molly, good evening.
Thanks, Max.
So, what's the purpose of this port and why is it here?
So basically the idea is for a cargo transportation center, or inland port as many are calling it, to go in this area in Jamesville. It's a crossroads of many railroad lines and where trucks would come in as well. And the idea is for the cargo from the railroads, which would be coming from anywhere from Lake Ontario to the Atlantic Ocean, would come through Jamesville, transport their cargo onto trucks, which would then be distributed to customers wherever they may be. Or it could be also used for exporters who are in turn, sending their cargo from trucks onto trains out to the rest of the United States and Canada.
So an operation like this, there's got to be some serious pros and cons.
Exactly. So basically the area right now they're looking at is a 225-acre space located at the Jamesville Quarry. Right now it's sitting pretty much unused. It's 107 years old, and it's pretty much tucked away in between Interstate 481 and Drumlin's Country Club. And a lot of the proponents are saying, this is a huge source of economic opportunity, can create 2,000 jobs, as many as that, and really, for impoverished areas in Syracuse, create, jobs that these people really need.
So what did the local residents have to say about this?
They're not quite as thrilled. There was a scoping meeting about 2 weeks ago, and even though this area is relatively tucked away, not too many residential homes around there, there are still some. And a lot of these people are complaining that there could be noise pollution, light pollution, traffic congestion, could decrease their property values. So they're right now in the scoping phase, collecting data for the environmental impact statement. We'll have to watch it a bit more closely.
Molly, thank you so much. Now, changing gears, China changed their controversial one-child policy last month. The government now allows families to have up to 2 children. Talking Points correspondent Shruti Marate is here with us to see what this means for the country and the international community as a whole. Thanks for being with me tonight. Yep. So, China is amending its one-child policy. Tell me a little more.
Well, the reason the Chinese government decided to do this is that its workforce is now beginning to retire and there aren't as many young people to come take their jobs. So they're thinking that if they amend this policy, there'll be more people being born and they'll be ready to take the jobs once this generation is ready to retire.
So this will certainly have an effect on the Chinese population.
It is expected to have an effect on the Chinese population, however, not so much the way the government wants it to have an effect. A lot of researchers are saying this is too little, too late. By the time these babies that are being conceived now are born, it'll be too late for this working population that needs to retire in the very near future to actually replace their jobs. However, because until now, there have only been only children in China. There have been an effect that psychologically only children are more risk averse and less entrepreneurial. So we are expected to see some more entrepreneurial spirits in the Chinese population going forward.
So to the global community then, the world population could see a big increase. China has the largest population in the world. What else could we see?
It's true that we're going to see an increase in the global population. There will be some effect on climate change. When it comes to climate change, it really depends where a child is being brought up to how much of their carbon footprint is going to affect the world. So like if there was a population increase in Saudi Arabia, there wouldn't be as much of an effect on climate change. But because it's the Chinese population that's increasing and China doesn't have that great of a global warming effect right now, we'll definitely see an effect on our climate.
So switching gears then, this could be huge for women's rights in China. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, so one way it'll be good for, one way the Chinese one-child policy has been good for women in China is when there was only one daughter in the family, that woman definitely, or most of the time, went to college and was supported because she was the only representative of that family. That might change now. However, there were also a lot of human rights violations, including forced abortions, forced sterilizations, that came from the one-child policy. And we'll see more of a setback on that with now 2 children being allowed to each family.
My last question for you is, has there been a global response to this phenomenon?
The one-child policy?
Yes.
I mean, the main issue is a lot of people asking, what is the issue with population control? Do we need to be worried about it? And the world population is increasing rapidly, so a lot of people have been looking at it recently. There hasn't been much being done.
All right, thanks so much for being with me tonight. And when we come back, we'll take a look at the current state of ISIS. You're watching Talking Points.
I've got a job to do today.
I've got a job to do today.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Your donations to Goodwill fund job training programs right in your community.
Feels good to start fresh, right?
Sure does. And like that, you're a job creator.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. God, no.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Don't look at me. Your hair's a bit frizzy today. Oh, you should pick that up. Oh, you're such a dork. Loser. Here, let me help you with that. Oops.
Every day, kids witness bullying.
Oh, look. Your crush is looking at you. Poor you.
They want to help, but don't know how.
See, no one here's gonna help you, because no one
Teach your
likes you.
kids how to be more than a bystander. Visit stopbullying.gov.
Following the recent bombing of a Russian airliner, ISIS has once again been thrust into the spotlight. Let's take a look at the past, present, and future of ISIS with Talking Points correspondent Josh Carney and Talking Points correspondent Elijah Shama. Gentlemen, thanks for being with me tonight.
Thanks for having us, Max.
So, starting with the past, Josh, to the global community, it seems as if this terrorist organization came out of nowhere just a few years ago.
Yep, well, ISIS emerged in the aftermath of the Hussein administration as a coercive militant power that took over major parts of the country. Not necessarily the land and territory, but was able to make sure that their territory was known through coercive power. They were able to take over much of the public infrastructure within certain areas and were able to determine their power throughout the region.
So they have this power in the region. How have they been so effective in achieving chaos throughout the region?
ISIS is a group that is made up of professionals in the application of violence. They understand the methodology, the religious experiences, as well as the cultural makeup of the community by and large, and thus they use the powers that they have, the resources that they have to bring terror and havoc to the region. Not necessarily are they going about it in a systematic way, but they understand the counterweights that outweigh their measures, and thus they've been able to proceed not only throughout Iraq, but in Syria, and specifically within the northern regions of Iraq. They've been able to be very powerful because they've taken over weaker areas of the state, and they've been able to use coercive measures to take over areas such as Mosul, which is the second largest city within Iraq. Because they've been so successful in this regard, and largely militaries and political powers within the region have dropped, they have been able to assert themselves and create an element of dominance that surrounds them within the region.
So Elijah, bringing us to the present, tell our viewers a little bit about the current state of ISIS in the Middle East.
Well, Max, I think it's interesting because the current state of ISIS is very different from that dominance that we saw last summer per se. We've seen a lot more major powers get involved in the region. We're seeing the U.S. backing Kurds. We're seeing Russia coming in with airstrikes, and we're also seeing the Kurds launching an offensive. So we're not really seeing ISIS having this lightning quick sort of takeovers of areas in the surrounding area. They're really more inspiring lone wolf attacks now overseas, and they're kind of consolidating and getting ready to go on the defensive, which is something that's fairly new to ISIS.
So speaking of lone wolf attacks, there's been a lot of talk about ISIS and its social media online recruiting and its success.
Well, the thing about ISIS is their social media prevalence is just so massive. To give you an idea, they have 46,000 Twitter accounts. That's an insane number, tweeting up to 2,000 tweets a day. This just shows the prevalence and kind of the far reach that this group has, but it doesn't necessarily speak to how effective these tactics have been, because we're seeing in Raqqa, the capital of ISIS, or the de facto capital, they're forcing all boys over age 14 to register their names with the police, which is sort of speaking to a conscription or a draft service, which suggests an air of desperation. They're running out of soldiers, and they're not actually bringing people into Syria to fight on those fronts anymore.
42,000 different Twitter accounts, you said?
Yes.
How do they even measure that?
Well, recently this was registered just from government aid, looking at basically seeing who's posting this radical content, and it's actually 46,000, my mistake. It's 46,000, and they're just basically accounts that are associated with ISIS or that have been posting ISIS pro-propaganda.
Okay, so now though it hasn't been confirmed, what kind of consequences will ISIS see after the recent Russian plane bombing?
I think because they've bombed a Russian plane in particular, they've kind of sort of kicked a hornet's nest, so to speak, because Russia hasn't exactly had the same history we've had when it comes to terrorism. If you look at the Chechnya attack, Russia responds very quickly, very harshly, and they don't usually leave a lot of survivors. So I think for Russia, this is going to be a very big moment for them, because we've seen a lot of Russian citizens on the fence over their bombing campaigns in Syria right now, because they don't want to get pulled into another Middle Eastern war. They see this similar to Afghanistan, where they were kicked out by the Mujahideen, and this might be kind of the thing that they use to unite their cause in Russia. And if we see a step up in Russian airstrikes, ISIS is really going to have to go on the defensive.
So moving to the future then, Josh, based on what we're seeing now, will we see any major changes in how this terrorist group operates? Are there any other factors that we need to take into consideration when approaching the future?
Well, in terms of the sustainability of this group, the 46,000 Twitter followers that we're talking about doesn't exactly scream sustainability to me. In fact, it seems as if the group is going outside of their realm to attract people to the region. It seems as if the caliphate, or the dream Islamic State that Anwar al-Awlaki claims is the main mission of ISIL, is deteriorating within the region. They're not able to support those main notions. I believe Elijah had more to speak on that issue because
I think it's interesting to see, because based on what we're seeing now, we're seeing an ISIS that is really surrounded on all fronts with a lot of major powers, and theoretically has kind of angered a lot of bigger powers in play. And when we see the Kurdish offensive in the region, we see a lot of the people that ISIS steamrolled last summer coming back for round two, so to speak, with a lot heavier artillery behind them.
So this organization, is it sustainable?
Well, in terms of where it gets its money, it's sustainable for now. It's controlled border crossings, it's controlled oil fields outside of Raqqa, including bank raids in towns and cities that it sees. So ultimately, it's working with an operating budget that far exceeds any other terrorist organization the world has ever known. In fact, it's valued at over $430 million as an approximation, as we read in CNN and ISW. But the critical contingent when looking at these numbers is how long it will actually be able to sustain the organization in both fronts, because it's fighting in several different areas. And because that is unknown, and because the consistency in which they are getting their money supplies could be cut off in terms of an oil field, or could be cut off in terms of places where they have the ability to raid, it's uncertain how sustainable it is from a money perspective. From the personnel perspective, as we brought up earlier, it seems as if they might be running out within the region, considering that there is a conscription, or a perceived conscription on the books.
So my million-dollar question, everybody's million-dollar question, what will it take for the global community to defeat ISIS?
Well, several generals within the United States military are calling for a cohesive action, a boots-on-the-ground approach to an overwhelming military issue that takes over a huge part of the global arena. But in fact, that is really not the answer, because it's a much deeper war, it's a much more religious war, and it actually spreads to terrorist organizations and attacks carried out throughout the world. So it's not a centralized state of affairs, and thus it makes it a very complicated issue that the United States and NATO alone cannot solve.
Yes, I really think this speaks to, going back to the religious aspect, these are conflicts that have been deeply rooted in the Middle East for probably close to thousands of years. ISIS is a Sunni-based terrorist organization, and Iran is a Shiite-based terrorist organization, and then we have the Kurds involved. So we have all these different parties that are all religiously fundamental in some way or another, that are kind of all vying for progress. So I really think this isn't necessarily so much a war that I think a lot of Western countries totally understand, because these conflicts are just older than time in some cases. So I think the only real thing to do is to kind of defeat the radical ideology behind ISIS.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining the conversation tonight. Coming up after the break, the road to 2016 continues. We'll be right back. Great block.
Thank you. You got a king?
Go fish!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Here is my handle and here is my spout.
When I get all steamed up, then I shout.
Tip me over and pour me out. Oh. The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Cheers. Take time to be a dad today.
The road to 2016 is heating up. Ben Carson has overtaken Donald Trump. The Democratic field has been narrowed to 3 candidates, and there are still 87 days until the Iowa caucuses. One story that has been developing is the rivalry between former Florida Governor Jeb Bush and Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Joining us now to break this down is Alex Amico. Alex, thanks for being with me tonight.
Thank you, Max.
So let's start by talking about how we got here. Before the summer of Trump, Jeb was seen as a favorite for the nomination, but he still has the largest super PAC in the field.
Right, so basically Trump happened. Jeb was seen as the establishment frontrunner. He sort of had to basically make a statement. Didn't go too well for him. He sort of fell flat. Rubio, on the other hand, he flew under the radar, and he's sort of starting to peak right now. Not necessarily peak, but he's starting to build some momentum. Right now, Rubio's at 14% nationally. Jeb's at his lowest point at 4% nationally. In Iowa, he's actually fallen behind Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, who hasn't even made it to the main stage for a debate yet. So I think that's pretty telling as how Jeb's campaign is going.
Now, Bush and Rubio have a history of a mentor-mentee relationship, and they've both been seen as establishment candidates. There are differences, though, that are working in Rubio's favor.
Yeah, well, so Bush is a lot more of a policy-oriented guy. He's not a natural campaigner. He's not a natural politician. Rubio, on the other hand, he's really good at bringing his personal narrative into his campaigning. He talks a lot about his history as a son of immigrants. He talks about his history dealing with his own student loan debt. He's a much more endearing figure personally than Jeb comes across on the campaign trail. So that's really kind of what's setting Rubio apart right now.
So in our final 30 seconds, looking ahead, Bush still has over $100 million in his super PAC. Is that going to be enough money to weather this storm?
You know, it's hard to say. He has that huge super PAC, but his campaign is losing money. He's had to slash costs dramatically. He's fired his COO. Rubio, on the other hand, he's getting all the momentum right now. He's gotten 3 Senate endorsements in 3 days. Bush has been doing worse in every debate since the debates started. If he has one more continuing on this trajectory, he might be drummed out of the race fairly soon.
Alex, thanks for being with us tonight. That's all the time we have for the conversation tonight. You can make sure to check out our Talking Points content online on social media, as well as the Talking Points blog. From all of us here at Citrus TV, I'm Max Darrow. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Syracuse.